You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristodoulou. It is February 10th, 2022, and we are back again, this time with another edition of my Read and React series, where we talk about some headlining news. I kind of give my thoughts on it. We break it down in depth and go into the nitty-gritty of it all. So make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and comment down below your thoughts on today's topic, which is Roger Goodell's Super Bowl press conference from yesterday. It happened sometime around, I think it was 1 or 2 o'clock. I think it was around 2, maybe 3 o'clock when he had the press conference, if I'm not mistaken. I was at the gym in the middle of it, so I had to go back and listen to it later. But a lot of interesting things came out of the conversation. Some pretty comical answers out of Roger Goodell. He was clearly suited up and giving you quid pro quo kind of answers. So some pretty funny stuff coming out of it, and also some pretty serious topics of discussion as well. So we'll dive into the serious stuff first, and obviously one of the bigger topics and some of the best questions came out regarding this was obviously the minority coaching issues in the NFL. One of the first questions that came up was basically just their process and how they were trying to help push minority coaches through the system and get them onto teams, because there's a severe lack of them in the NFL, especially at the head coaching spot. Where he responded with essentially their goal was to develop and grow the database that they have that's just basically filled with information and at teams' disposals. He was really focusing in on that, and basically was a way that they were allowing these teams to see the head coaches for what they were and just how qualified they actually were. But he also iterated afterwards that it's clear that they need to look at what else that they need to do and expand on that, because it's obviously not working, as we only have 5 minority head coaches in the NFL this season, being down from 8 from the year prior. So there's definitely a lot of work to do on that aspect, obviously, and it's good to see that Goodell and the league recognizes that, and I'm assuming they're going to make improvements on that, but until we see results, only time will tell, I guess. Another good question that got brought up, and this one was one that I think the entire internet world was asking when it happened, was the confusion on the stances between basically saying Brian Flores' legal allegations were meritless, but then sending a letter to teams damning them for not getting the results that they wanted in terms of hiring minority coaches. He kind of split the two in half and essentially said that the initial reaction to the legal claims was one thing and not necessarily about the experiences that the minority coaches were having, Flores included in that. So it sounds like they were just they were dismissing what he was saying legally, but not disregarding what they were saying about just their experience that they were having, and that, they don't want to discredit that because they take that serious. It sounds like, I don't know, really interesting way for that to have gone about, because I feel like they're kind of one and the same, both the legal action and Flores' experiences and others as well. They they converge together into one focal point. So interesting stuff, to say the least. Again, clearly Goodell suited up for some of these questions, just representing the Shield and saying what he can to kind of dance around the questions. The one good thing that came out of it is that Goodell himself stated that it's important for the league to listen to Flores and others with their grievances and really hear them out on what they're dealing with, which is, I think, probably the biggest piece that came out of his answer for that one there. So it's good to hear that they're at least willing to listen and they recognize that that is what they need to do. I mentioned that during my Read and React when we were talking about Flores and the situation when it first broke. So it's good to see that's what they're doing there. Another really good question that came up was basically why the NFL and owners have a hard time hiring people of color at the highest of levels. And he just kind of went back to the numbers, the game, which kind of seemed to be the baseline of defense for this or for any sort of these questions, was talking about just we're using numbers to figure out how to be better. We believe in the values of diversity and making sure that minorities are represented in leadership roles. And then obviously how they need to do a better job and evaluate where they can be better. But he ultimately admitted they don't really have the answer right now, which doesn't really surprise anyone. But it is what it is. Ultimately, with all of that topic of discussion, I think it's just going to boil down to time and seeing how the NFL handles this going forward. Is this one of those things where they're just putting up a front because, the news is hot right now and, the microscope is on them? We'll have to see. I'm I'm assuming the media is going to keep the pressure on because it seems like we're kind of at a tipping point with this sort of issue. So we'll have to see where it goes. But interesting to kind of just see some of the answers Goodell was saying. I feel like we don't really get too many press conferences like this from Goodell. It'd be nice if we got more. Even if it was just like once a quarter through like the NFL season and during the offseason, maybe there's more interviews and I'm just not seeing them. But I'm pretty sure we don't really get sit downs like this where people just get to fire questions at them and him kind of do like a state of the address of the NFL. Another topic of discussion that got brought up during the interview was Dan Snyder. Some news breaking out earlier today that women were coming out, former employees of the at the time Washington football team, now the Commanders, and basically alleging that Dan Snyder was a part of sexual misconduct and harassment through the work environment, which at this point, when you kind of see the whole Dan Snyder situation, it's kind of lost on me how this guy still even is an owner in the NFL, just with the amount of issues that has revolved around the Washington Commanders, I keep wanting to call them the football team, the Washington Commanders, and just the drama that this has all caused. It's a little bit ridiculous now, and based off some of the answers and questions that were being asked on this topic, there's a very easy out on this, and it's the fact that the owners themselves as a group can vote Dan Snyder out. I think really it boils down, because the question was asked and Goodell said he believed so. He wasn't sure, and afterwards through like some of the insiders were all digging deep and they were getting answers. Yes, they can just vote him out ultimately. It seems like they need to do that. I'm curious to see if the owners are willing to out one of their own and what the repercussions of that might be. But it sounds like the league's taking these allegations really seriously. Based off what he was saying himself, he said that they were treating these accusations really seriously and they plan on investigating it. And he doesn't really see how a team can investigate themselves. So they are obviously going to be handling the investigation, which I think is key. I don't see how you could just allow the Washington Commanders to investigate themselves with their own internal issues like that, having an independent source handle that. And I don't even know if it's right for the league to do it. I feel like the league should outsource it to an independent, legal office to do that investigation. We'll see if that's the route they go, just because the league is still tied to Washington as a football team. So I don't know. I think even with them doing the investigation, somebody else needs to handle it that's not affiliated with the NFL. And then another question that came up was, why did the league come to a common interest agreement with Dan Snyder, and did he block the release of any of the findings from the investigation they had earlier last year? And from what it sounded like, Roger Goodell really was not going to budge on answering any legal questions. He even stated himself, he's like, I'm not legally allowed to go over any of the agreement situation or anything like that. He said that the outcome was controlled outside of the team and that he believes Beth Wilkinson did a great job and everything, but that they don't have any plans to release any of the information because some of the people that came forward on the agreement that they would remain anonymous. Does not really sound like the case, though, considering there's a whole lawsuit thing going on right now, and people themselves have come out and said we did not want to remain anonymous. That's BS. So some interesting back and forth with that. Hopefully the truth comes out with that. And the fact that Congress has kind of stepped up now and said, okay, we want to see these findings now in this investigation, because it's a whole thing now. If the fact that Congress is stepping up now and saying something about it, clearly there's an obvious issue here that needs to be addressed, and I don't think that the NFL is really going to be able to keep this buried for much longer. I mean, if lawmakers are getting involved now, it's not the circus that the NFL runs with how they do their investigation and everything like that. Now it's real legal processes getting involved. It'll be interesting to see how all of that shakes out in the coming months. I feel like the truth will be revealed eventually, especially because it feels like this keeps snowballing and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the fact that we're spending Super Bowl press conferences talking about an investigation that closed quite some time ago. I don't know the exact timeline, but quite some time ago, and more allegations keep coming up. I have a strong feeling that at some point down the road, Dan Snyder is probably going to be getting the boot and forced to sell the team, which, in my opinion, at this point is probably what's necessary based off the culture and the issues that have been built around there. Obviously, there's been a lot of change going on there, and Dan Snyder's kind of removed himself from the football side of things. But regardless, the damage is done, and I don't really think him being able to collect money off of all the damage that he's caused is really, it does not really make sense to me. So I think that a removal of him from ownership is probably where this is all heading at some point down the road, but I have a feeling it might get ugly. Another topic of discussion, and it was just a quick one here, and I'm surprised it didn't really get brought into detail more because it was a pretty wild one at that. The Stephen Ross thing and paying for losses, that was a question that got brought up, and basically the question was, how troubling was it for Goodell to hear about Stephen Ross offering money to lose to Brian Flores and kind of what the discipline will be. Basically, all he said was that he found it very disturbing and that the league will get to the bottom of it and violations will not be tolerated and that discipline will be based on severity. That was basically what I got from his entire answer, which makes sense, but also that's another thing where, because the NFL is like right in bed with the gambling companies now, and they're only expanding, and I feel like every other commercial in the NFL now is a gambling company and or a sports book or some sort of advertisement like that. What is Caesars, FanDuel, you name it, DraftKings, all those people, they are just like, it feels like it's every other commercial these days. That's going to be something that I think, again, I could definitely see like government getting involved, because if owners are, rigging games and people are betting on them, and who's to say that Stephen Ross wasn't like, yeah, take a dive and I'm willing to give you, at the time, because it was 16-game season, up to $1.6 million to lose games. But then he's telling somebody else to turn around being like, hey, we're tossing games, win this money back for me. Like, that's a problem. So there's a lot that I think that's going to end up turning into as well. The NFL is in like a really shaky place right now. It's very funny to kind of see all of this stuff come to a head, because the NFL prides itself on dignity, but then like you have literally nothing but problems stemming down from the ownership of the team. So I think, karma comes back and comes back hard at times. And I think that some of these owners that are doing some of these really shoddy and shady things are probably about to have to pay the bill, and it's not going to be pretty for them. And that seems to be the direction that we're heading. And I'm pretty interested, I guess I could say, in what the end results of something like that are going to be, because if it comes out that that's not even just something Stephen Ross is doing, but it's something that is happening internally with other teams as well, you have a pretty big problem on your hands in the NFL and just like the credibility of the league. Another thing that got brought up was Deflategate, and the question was basically just like on the reporting of the NFL destroying the evidence of Deflategate that could have exonerated Tom Brady. This has been a huge topic of discussion in the New England area. As somebody that lives in Massachusetts, I've been hearing all about this for the last few days. And basically Goodell was like, the league was very clear with what we were going to do, and then ended up finishing his statement with probably the quote of a lifetime that I've ever seen from like any sort of interview that had to do with anything that was like serious in this manner. Goodell went on to say that, I don't know what happened to the data, to be honest with you. We don't really look back on that. This is the guy that is supposed to be in charge of the NFL, and he's the head of the league. You're going to tell me that you don't know what happened to the data for one of probably the bigger controversies in the NFL's history in terms of like a cheating scandal. You don't know what happened to it. You don't know if it was destroyed. You don't know if you guys just locked it away in a file somewhere on a computer. Like, give me a break, Goodell. Give me a break, Goodell. Like, I understand you're the suit and you're the poster boy for the NFL, but like, let's be real now. You don't know what happened to the data. Like, let's try to be a little bit more transparent and a little bit more honest. The last piece of news that came out from it, and I think this is a pretty exciting one just in terms of like the growth of the NFL and the expansion of the NFL, would be on the games being held in Germany over the next 4 years. It was announced that Munich will be hosting their very first regular season game this year, 2022, and they will be also splitting a few more games with Frankfurt as well over the next 4 years. There'll be 2 games there, 2 games in Munich over those next 4 years, which is really exciting stuff. I'm all for the expansion of the NFL. I used to think growing up the NFL Europe thing was going on at the time when I first started watching the NFL, and I always thought that was a pretty neat thing. And for that to just kind of go away, and now the NFL doesn't really have any actual reach in those regions other than these international games, it's exciting to see them expand out into other countries. And this always brings up the question of like, do you see a team ending up in some other country and playing like a full at this point 17 slate game like season now from there? I don't know. I think that the NFL would do a lot better with creating leagues in other countries where it's popular enough, which I feel like is probably the end goal. I just don't, because I don't know how feasible travel schedule wise it is for teams to be on the other side of the world. The NFL season would have to be expanded like you think of what like kind of like football or soccer, depending on where you are in the world. like handles their thing. Like their championship, their world championship is every 4 years. Like the Super Bowl is every year for the NFL. And if you're going to do something like that, where you start expanding to other countries, like maybe it would make more sense to just have, some sort of deviation of talent going through these other countries and stuff like that in other leagues, and then ultimately having like a world championship every few years or so. I just don't really the logistics of a team being on the other side of the world travel wise does not sound like it would go really well. They would have to figure out some way to alleviate that scheduling wise, and I think they would be able to, but there would just, I don't really see how that would work out. I really don't. I love the idea of it, and it would be cool if like maybe we got a team in Canada or in Mexico, because they're on the same landmass, but just something that's 12 hours across the water, that is going to mess with some people. The sleep schedules and just trying to keep yourself just in a life schedule as a whole, I don't really see it working. That's kind of where I've always stood on that. I love the idea of it, but like the logistics of it just don't really make sense to me. Another separate NFL league in Europe would be something that I think would make more sense and would be a lot more fun. The other thing that got brought up was also the NFL going back to Mexico this year, so expansion of the international games as well there. They were not able to do Mexico last year. It sounds like they're going to do it again this year at sometime in November. So all the international games are back for that, and it's exciting to hear because, I understand that it hurts teams being, not being home for that game. They lose a home game essentially, but as like a viewer and a fan of the game, it's exciting to see teams play in other stadiums and see the reactions from other countries. So I'm all for it. I'm excited for it, and I think it's great for the game and the popularity, obviously. And at the end of the day, as an NFL fan, I would love to see the game grow and grow and grow. So excited to see all that. But that's pretty much all my thoughts and reactions to the press conference. If there was one takeaway from this whole thing that I'd have to give, it would be that, Roger Goodell really is like the best guy to represent the NFL, because when it comes to hard-hitting questions, he does a great job dancing around with like very, suited up answers and defending the shield well, but also like he is not afraid to make himself sound like a dunce either, just for the sake of protecting the shield. Like his whole statement on the I don't know what happened to the data for the Deflategate stuff was literally like he was the fall guy for the NFL right there. And I think he knew if he was going to get asked that question, because that whole conversation was getting brought up the week in advance to this. I think he knew it was coming, and it does not seem like he really cares if he has to make himself look like a fool for the sake of the NFL. They've grown exponentially with him as the leader there. So whether you love Roger Goodell or you hate Roger Goodell, if there's one thing that I know for sure, it is that he is the guy for that job, because he is not afraid to take a fall for the NFL if necessary. But that's it for the Read and React today. Appreciate y'all for watching. Potentially catch you guys on another video later today. Just kind of depends on my schedule and what's going on for the day. But I appreciate you all. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Have a good one.